I think he is obstinate. He may well be a little proud of having to some extent foreseen what has happened and of having refused to listen to any proposals while we were at Moscow. The emperor took up the point. The burning of the Russian towns, the burning of Moscow, was merely stupid, he said. Why use fire if he had relied so much on the winter? He has arms and soldiers for fighting. It is madness to spend so much money on them for nothing. One should not begin by harming oneself more than if one were beaten by the enemy. Kutuzov's retreat was inept, as it could be. It's the winter that has been our undoing. We are victims of the climate. The fine weather tricked me. If I had set out a fortnight sooner, my army would be at Vitebsk, and I should be laughing at the Russians and your prophet Alexander. He would be regretting that he did not negotiate. All our disasters hinge on that fortnight and on the failure to carry out my orders for the levies of Polish Cossacks. Those prophetic proclamations of his were all nonsense. If they had wanted to draw us into the interior, they should have retired in the first place and not have endangered Bagration's army by spreading their forces over a line which, being too near the frontier, had to be too long. They should not have spent so much money building card castles along the Dvina. They should not have collected so many stores there. They have been planning from day one to the next without settled scheme. They have never been able to fight to any purpose. But for the cowardice and stupidity of Partunow, the Russians would not have captured a single wagon from me at the crossing of the Berezina, and we should have cut off part of their advance guard, taken 1,800 prisoners, and with an army of wretches who had nothing left but their lives, we should have won a battle against the pick of their infantry, which has fought against the Turks. Actually, though, when the wreck of our army was surrounded by 3 of theirs, what did they do? They picked off the wretches who were dying of cold or whom hunger forced to break away from their units. On another occasion, the emperor remarked to me that if the Russians had really intended to draw him into the interior, they would not have marched to attack him at Vitebsk. That from the beginning, that they should have harassed our flanks more. He said they should have waged only this guerrilla warfare, intercepting our dispatches, our smaller detachments, the officers who came out to join us, the raiding parties. He regarded it as a serious fault to have given battle so near to Moscow. Everything turned out badly, the emperor said to me on another occasion, because I stayed too long at Moscow. If I had left 4 days after I had occupied it, as I thought of doing when I saw the town in flames, the Russians would have been lost. The Tsar would have been only too glad to accept the generous peace which I should have then offered from Vitebsk, even from Vilna. If the cold had robbed me of my army, I should have dictated the terms of peace, and your precious Alexander would have signed them, if only to be rid of the military guardianship of his boyars. It was they who thrust Kutuzov upon him, and what has Kutuzov done? He risked losing his army on the Moskva and brought about the burning of Moscow. During the retreat, when he had nothing to fight against but lifeless troops, nothing but walking ghosts, what did he attempt? He and Wittgenstein permitted the crushing of the admiral. All the other Russian generals were worth more than that old dowager Kutuzov. Tolly did at least spare the army. He did not fight with a capital at his back. Even Wittgenstein, who had just committed so many blunders so as not to put himself under the orders of the admiral or Kutuzov, was far superior to him. If the King of Naples plays me no foolish tricks, if he supervises the generals and stays at first with the vanguard so as to encourage the younger troops, who will be a little scared. Things will soon be righted again. The Russians will halt. The Cossacks will keep their distances as soon as they see us show our teeth. If the Poles support me and the Russians don't make peace during the winter, you will see what has happened to them by July. Everything has conspired to cause my failure. I was not well served in Warsaw. The Abbé de Prat was afraid. He played the busybody instead of le grand seigneur. He looked after his own interests and chattered in drawing rooms and newspapers, but in public affairs, nothing. He roused no enthusiasm in the Poles. The levies were not made. I got nothing from all the resources I should have been able to rely on. Bassano bungled things in Poland, as he did in Turkey and in Sweden. I was wrong to be angry with Talleyrand. The boudoir intrigues of the Duchess irritated me against him, and now my affairs have miscarried. He would have given a much more definite direction to the Polish effort. As it is, the Poles have immortalized themselves in our ranks as individuals, but they have done nothing for their country. Everyone lauded this Abbé de Prat to me. He has intelligence, but he's a muddler. On another occasion, the emperor said to me, speaking of the Tsar Alexander, "He is an intelligent prince and full of good intentions. He is more capable than all his ministers. If he were less distrustful of his own powers, he would be better than all his generals. He needs only decisiveness to be very capable indeed, but he is not master in his own house. He is continually hampered by 1,000 petty considerations on account of his family and of individuals too. Although he takes a close interest in the army and gives a good deal of attention to it, perhaps more than I do, to question some detail, yet he is deceived about these very things: distance, customs, the opposition of the nobility to recruiting, and the interest that ill-paid commanders have in drawing pay and rations, all combined to keep the army from being up to strength. They had been working ceaselessly for 3 years to bring it up to strength, and as a result, they had less than half the number of men under arms that they were supposed to have before the day of battle came. You must admit you thought yourself that the army was much stronger than it was. I always thought you overestimated them, but you would never believe me. That Cossack Agyat was right when he said that the Russian generals valued their comfort and didn't know how to fight properly. One must do justice to the Cossacks. It is they who have achieved all the Russian successes in this campaign. They are certainly the best light troops in existence. That army might go a long way if the Russian soldiers had someone else to lead them. At various times, the emperor discussed with me the sacrifices that peace would involve, and what the Russians would probably demand on behalf of the Duke of Oldenburg. They will want to reestablish him in his possessions, he said. Alexander takes the matter very much to heart because of the Dowager Empress. Since he had asked my opinion, I put it to him that I found it difficult to suppose the Russians would not try to profit by the occasion, to the extent of obtaining the evacuation of Danzig and the other positions in the north, which we had used starting points against them. I said that if we were obliged to abandon the Niemen, as I expected we should be, their demands would surely include the surrender of our fortified positions on the Oder. At this, the emperor cried out in protest that he would then lose all the advantages he had so far obtained against the English, and that the main issue still was to force them to make peace, for without there could be no lasting tranquility. I replied that it might be possible to maintain the customs organization in the ports and along the coast without turning them into French citadels. And the Russians, he asked, what attitude will they take with regard to England? Your Majesty is in a better position to pronounce on that question than I replied. But certainly you will not persuade them to put themselves in the same position that they were in before. I doubt if even the Tsar could do that. Then peace is impossible, the emperor replied shortly. If it is not to be general, one must not deceive oneself. The conversation later turned on the situation of France, on the uneasy state of Europe, which I attributed to the invasions that had taken place. I suggested to the emperor that a system of more modified power within the restricted limits would, bind our allies to us, and even those states which would remain outside the system. I pointed out to him that from the Duke of Gotha to the Emperor of Austria, all the governments were frightened by the expansion of our political system, that they saw it as a step towards a universal monarchy, for which the war with England seemed to them a pretext. The emperor listened to me attentively, joked about my moderation, and repeated to me what he had said on the other occasions about his intentions and his motives. He tried to prove to me that he was far from having in view those ends which with he was credited. He was working against the English alone. Since their trade had ramifications everywhere, he had to pursue them everywhere. He said it was the intrigues of the English, what he calls fedes punica, which he continually forced him to extend his sphere of operations. He spoke of how needful it would always be for him to maintain a considerable army as long as the struggle with the English continued, because their government was always working to stir up Europe against him, and so forth.